Hello fellow Star Trek fans, welcome back to a brand new episode of 10 Forward, the Star Trek episode summary and recap series brought to you as part of the Clonestar podcast. I am your host Mike Overton, and in this week's episode I will be checking out Star Trek Lower Decks Season 5, Episode 5. The episode is entitled Starbase 80. Let's get into it. Returning from a tough mission, Mariner finally embraces her officer role, but a red alert interrupts the calm as a navigation malfunction sends the Cerritos out of warp, shaking Cetacean ops. The nearest refuge is, well, Starbase 80. Mariner pleads with Captain Freeman to avoid it at all costs, but there isn't really much of a choice. Whilst most, especially Ransom, enjoy the 22nd century decon gel, Mariner warns of the curse of Starbase 80. They meet Cassia Knox, who had hoped for repair help but learns that, well, it's not coming. The crew helps out, and whilst Ransom and Freeman hunt for an old nav processor, the lieutenants encountered reverse gravity, broken tech, and, well, some food stands. Rutherford tries fixing things, but things get really creepy when the glowing-eyed people start licking the walls. In the shopping district, a knife gang of Akamarians threatens, and Rutherford begins to act, well, just a little bit strangely. Tendi is affected too, and they meet the eccentric Dr. Harrison Horsebury, who can't diagnose anything wrong. Mariner realises that the curse might actually be real, and Knox attacks her, destroying her comm badge. Meanwhile, Freeman and Ransom find Starbase 80 in complete and utter disarray, with an officer, who Jean, slumped over a console. They fix the alarms and search for the chief engineer. After battling malfunctioning systems and turbolifts, they finally find Jean, who's been using them to repair the station. He tasks them with clearing out bats in the basement before they can get a spare part. Ransom, who's furious, as well as Freeman, completely understand Jean's frustration, and the two bond over their shared experiences of being the undervalued by Starfleet, with Captain Freeman emphasising as a California-class captain. Back aboard the Cerritos, Mariner and Knox realise that the crew's zombification is linked to their comm badges. As Boimler returns, Mariner tracks a biosignal to Cetacean Ops, where they discover an energy consciousness controlling one of the whales. Mariner and Knox fight the ghostly entity, but with some quick thinking, Dr. Horsebury uses a bonk to free the whale. The crew returns to normal, and Knox explains that the energy being, Clem, was just, well, overworked. Clem had been trying to prove that he could communicate with corporeals, but ended up taxing himself too much. Starbase 80 accepts Clem as part of their team, and Rutherford fixes the gravity, and Freeman won't leave until every damn bat is caught, including the giant one. Watch out for those claws, Captain. As the crew prepares to leave, they share a moment of camaraderie, realising that they survived yet another bizarre Starbase 80 adventure. The only thing I did find was that it was very obvious that Jean was the chief engineer. Literally from the moment you see Jean on, I think it was if I remember correctly, it was the station's bridge, asleep at the console. No, it was engineering. Sorry, he was in engineering, asleep at the console. All the alarms are going off. You can tell that he was the chief engineer, and I think that's the only sort of downer from this episode, was the fact that it was really obvious. But that being said, it was still a great, funny episode, and I loved it. I tell you what, there were lots of really entertaining parts to this week's episode. It's like they took all of the Star Trek from the 90s and 2000s, threw it in a blender, picked it, and then threw it at the wall, and loads of references stuck. I mean, we had Parthus, which is food from the Vengeance Factor, if my memory serves me correctly. And then in the same episode, Akamarians were also from the same episode, which I thought was really interesting. The Tarkanan parasite, which infected Dr. Horsebury, well, that's the same one that LaForge got infected with in Identity Crisis, which was, I thought, just a nice little nod back to another TNG episode. Some Easter eggs for this show was, if you looked at the arcade, Every game was for the Great Koala, which I thought was fantastic. It was just a really, really funny episode, and it was really entertaining to watch. My standout moment this week, I think it was just the whole storyline. It was really well thought out. The ocean planet that Mariner visits first, which was Pisces? I think it's Pisces 9, which is where Clem infected the whale. So the ending of the episode tied in really nicely to the beginning of the episode, and just the storyline all the way through, all the other references, to see Acamarians and Pathers and all of these things, just shows you how great the story writers are. And I think that has to be the standout moment for this week, is essentially the story writers and the storyline. As the self-reflective final season hits the halfway point, Lower Decks delves into its own lore, exploring Star Trek canon whilst challenging its characters and, well, of course, keeping up the humour. Returning to the dreaded Starbase 80, the episode brought gags tied to classic Star Trek, but at its core, it tested Mariner's new Season 5 mindset of no longer resisting the system. Tawny Newsome showcased a range, shifting from the optimistic "I sound like Boimler" lieutenant to a paranoid Starbase alum, back to her self-actuated understanding. She was wonderfully supported by comedian Nicole Byer as the bubbly Illurian, her foil for the episode. Meanwhile, the rest of the Lower Deckers were mostly along for the ride, each getting their own comedic moments. At its heart, the episode was a classic Trek Alien of the Week mystery, with teamwork and science providing the solutions, culminating in a classic Lower Decks twist with cetacean ops. The episode also highlighted Captain Freeman, with Dawn Lewis brilliantly guiding us through the fun yet exhausting Starbase 80 tour. Freeman's obsession with her alternate self from Dos Cerritos, who was exiled to, Starbase 80, returned, and no matter the challenge, she wasn't about to let the station get the better of her. She was perfectly paired with Stephen Root as Gene Jabrowski, as cynical counterpart to Cassia, who manipulated Freeman throughout. Root, best known as Milton from Office Space, added depth to the character, making him ideal fit for the role of someone stuck in a thankless job on a cursed station. This visit to Starbase 80 embodied what Lower Decks is all about, reminding us that the Starbase 80 is basically the Cerritos of Starbases. In the end, the misfit crew found common ground, bonding over second chances, both with a second contact ship and scrappy underdogs of Starbase 80. To emphasise this, Cassia even refers to the crew of Starbase 80 as the scrappy underdogs, echoing Mariner's description of the Cerritos' crew with the series premiere. Whilst heartwarming, the episode also indulged in a little horror genre that had always found its place within Star Trek, including a fun dip into the zombies trope. The production team delivered once again, crafting a Starbase that felt both haunted and nostalgic, filled with references to the original series, Enterprise, and the Next Generation. These ties to the Enterprise amplify Starbase 80's reliance on Starfleet's hand-me-downs, whilst giving fans of the show the love it often lacks in new Star Trek universe. Notably absent this week was any mention of the, space potholes, this season's arc, which was teased last week as being caused by unknown forces. This season keeps that mystery simmering in the background, and the episode may serve as a pause before the storm, as things ramp up in the back half of the season. But the indulgence was well worth it. In fact, if you want to get all Steve Levy about it, its extended visit to a kooky workplace full of lovable weirdos could serve as a stealth pilot for a spin-off. Who wouldn't want to see more of Cassia, Chad, and Dr. Horseberry? And, of course, Gene. Another strong episode from a fantastic season of animated comedy that feels like a gift to Star Trek fans. Episodes like Starbase 80 seems especially crafted as a reward for long-time franchise fans, and particularly those fans of this season. Thank you so much for choosing in to this week's episode of 10 Forward. Remember, you can join our Patreon from as little as £2 a month, which gets you exclusive access to content early, as well as many other perks. Find out more of the details in the video or podcast description. But until next time, live long and prosper.